Welcome to today's Spark Your Health Talk, pumping up your cognitive strength with Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf. My name is Katira Noviello-Kapoor, and I am the Senior Director of Health Promotion, Wellness, and Athletics here at the 92nd Street Y. We are thrilled to learn evidence-based tips for staying sharp through the latest scientific research and from the healing wisdom of Ayurveda. We hope you will also be able to join us for upcoming Spark Your Health Talks. On March 14th, we welcome Dr. Pooja Lakshman and Lauren Smith-Brody to discover a revolutionary real self-care framework. And on April 4th, with the release of Unhunched, author Aisha Tahir and I will discuss the importance of wellness through posture. We will leave 20 minutes at the end of our program for questions, which will be collected from the chat. So please feel free to submit your questions throughout the duration of the program. I am now pleased to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf. Dr. Nancy Lonsdorf is an award-winning physician, author of 4 books, speaker and educator specializing in integrating conventional medicine with Ayurveda for brain health, women's health, and chronic illnesses. She received her medical degree from the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and did residency training in psychiatry at Stanford University. Dr. Lonsdorf trained in evidence-based protocols for the prevention and reversal of cognitive decline with Dr. Dale Bredesen at the Institute of Functional Medicine and brings over 35 years of experience to her current practice and courses. And I am pleased to bring her on. Dr. Lonsdorf, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Thanks, Katera. I'm really excited and happy to share what I have experienced and know from my clinical work and to really bring a new hope for our brains and for aging. I'm going to share a new paradigm. Some of you have probably heard about it. Maybe many of you haven't, but it's not as hopeless a situation as it used to be. And I hope today to empower you to take charge of your own prevention, just as you may have taken charge of your prevention for cardiovascular disease or for getting out of shape or getting overweight. There are specific things that we can do that can quite dramatically reduce the risk of getting cognitive decline in our later years. So I'd like to start by sharing some PowerPoint slides and walk you all through this. And please feel free to chat in the chat box. Actually, let's just start. How many of you have heard of the book, The End of Alzheimer's by Dr. Dale Bredesen and his Bredesen Recode Protocol? You want to just chat in the chat box if you have. I'm not sure we have a chat. Do we have a chat for everyone, Katera?
Yes, we do. Yep, everybody should be able to type their responses.
Okay, so feel free to chat if you know about it. So I haven't seen any chats yet, so I'm kind of excited because I think that I have something really special to share with you. And hopefully when you leave today, you will start on the path of optimizing your brain health. All right, so I wanted to start by just sharing a short story. When I was a kid, I was probably 15 years old, and I was sitting with my mother and my aunt, my mother's sister. My mother's sister had been living at that time with their mother, my maternal grandmother. And I was listening to their conversation, and I was kind of perplexed and somewhat disturbed to hear that my aunt said, "Oh, grandma is telling the person that's hired to help take care of her, who is that woman? That woman," meaning my aunt. And I thought, now, how could that possibly be? My aunt is my grandma's daughter, and it's not possible she wouldn't know who she was. So that is the heartfelt tragedy of Alzheimer's disease and severe dementia. And that's what we are all fearful of and want to avoid. So in my practice over the years, I have Fortunately, the first 20, 30 years of my practice, I was mostly dealing with younger people. They kind of grew up with me in my practice, maybe 10 years or 15 years ahead of me, older than me. But in the last 10 years or so, as my patients have, many of them gotten into their later 60s to the mid to later 70s, I have been faced with having to deal with much more challenging cases of memory loss. Earlier, when I was seeing people in their 40s and 50s, occasionally somebody would complain of memory problems or cognitive problems. But what I found was that it was usually solvable through checking their B12 level and finding that it was low, or checking for lead or other heavy metals and finding that one of my patients had a crock pot that had lead glaze inside and her lead level was high. And as soon as they cleared that out or took the B12, they were better within a couple months. So now it's not so easy, because by the time somebody comes, unfortunately, people do not usually come on their own. Occasionally they do, and they say, you know, I'm noticing something that is deteriorating in my memory or my cognition or my reasoning or my ability to handle some complex accounting or something of that sort. That is the best situation. That's the best time to come for some evaluation and to start taking the measures I'm going to talk about today. By the time you have a family member who's taking you because you're not really clear enough in your own cognition to realize you have a problem and what to do about it and how to make a phone call and maybe look up a doctor, read a book, and decide some action steps. That is when that is beyond the cognitive power of an individual, then it's still potentially improvable and even, or at least stabilizable, but it is much harder to achieve that, and it takes more investment of the person and certainly their primary caregiver, we could say. So I'd like to start by telling you that I had just serendipitously came upon Dr. Dale Bredesen, who is a professor of neurology at UCLA and was the director of the Buck Institute for Aging for probably 20 plus years, and is a career researcher in Alzheimer's. And he has spent the majority of his career, until maybe the last 7, 8 years, just focusing on what is the magic bullet. What is the one drug that's going to turn this around? What is the mechanism? What is the active ingredient that we can find and discover to counter this mechanism of the brain deteriorating in this cascade of events we call Alzheimer's? And he began to be quite discouraged in the last 8 to 10 years, and so did his team to some degree, because grant after grant and research after research and drug company study after drug company study that was funding it ended up, they looked promising in a mouse, but they didn't pan out in the humans. And unfortunately, we're still at that point. We still don't have a magic bullet. And I will share with you why, and I'm just going to say a little more about the story behind it. Is that as one of his lab fellows and very close colleagues of Dr. Bredesen shared with me, he had been bringing up, his name is Dr. Rao, he had been bringing up to Dr. Bredesen this study and that study, this study on CoQ10, this study on homocysteine, this study on this vitamin, this study on diabetes of the brain. And Dale had kind of like, you know, said, okay, that's interesting, but never really done anything. And then finally it reached a critical mass, and he said, okay, we'll have a meeting, bring everything you can find, every reference in the literature to anything like natural lifestyle, supplement, anything you can find that has been shown to impact or be associated with Alzheimer's. So they did, and they put all those Post-its all over the walls and studied them together. And Dale Bredesen's conclusion was we have to use all of them. Well, let's try using all of them. Let's try addressing everything that might be a causative factor that leads to this common pathway, which is laying down of amyloid in excess and laying down of, or the creation of tau tangles within cells, those pathognomonic signs of Alzheimer's in the brain. And I heard about this actually because I had lunch with a colleague of his who told me, hey, my best friend was Dr. Bredesen's first patient. And I'd never heard of this before. And she said, yes, my friend called me up one day and she said, she speaks like 6 languages, her friend. She was in her 60s, but she was going to Afghanistan and doing special grant work with women, and was an amazing, amazing professional and workaholic. And she said, my friend called me up and she said, I just want to let you know I'm going to commit suicide. And her friend said, what? And she said, look, I'm having serious memory problems. She said, I flew to Texas last week and I got there, I couldn't remember why I was there. So I had to fly back. And then I found a message on my voicemail at home that reminded me why I'd gone there. And the person I was supposed to meet had messaged me. So she said, I'm not going to go the way my mother went. Her mother had Alzheimer's and had passed away after a long illness, and she had been a caregiver for her mom. She said, I'm not going to put my family through it. I'm not going to go through it. So her friend said, wait, I have this colleague. He has a new approach to Alzheimer's. Why don't you go fly and see him? So her friend flew out to California, Dr. Dale, who had never applied this to any patient before, said, look, this is like experimental. This is an idea I have. We're trying to get funding, but drug companies, and we haven't been able to get any money to study such an eclectic approach. But, if you want to work with me, we can experiment with this. And she said, absolutely, just tell me what to do. I'll do everything. And she did everything. And that was she was probably about 66. Now she's 75. And it took her about 2 to 3 years. She said in the beginning, she couldn't write a report for work. She couldn't even keep a grocery list. She was mixing up her children's names. And in 3 years, she did everything he said. She got back to her transcendental meditation, her stress reduction. She started sleeping at night instead of cherishing being a workaholic. She restarted her hormone therapy she'd been on since menopause. She did all the diet and all the exercise. She studied yoga. She became a yoga teacher in those 3 years. Anyway, the bottom line is she recovered her cognition. And she went back to work at a major university in New York for several years. She finished her projects in Afghanistan just before. And she now is a coach. She works with me in my practice, and she coaches some of my patients and their families who are implementing this approach. So I just wanted to say that I learned by firsthand story, but I thought, well, that's a great story, but I don't know what this is all about. And about 6 months later, all of a sudden, I had an opportunity to go on one day's notice to Dr. Dale Bredesen's training program at the Functional Medicine Institute. And I learned the basics of all of his approaches, and I immediately started to implement that in my practice. I so desperately wanted to be of help to the patients and their families who come with this problem. And it's been a very fulfilling journey. It's not easy always. Sometimes it seems pretty easy. I'll share one lady who shares her story on a video we'll watch. But it is a path that can work. And my bottom line to you, if you have to leave now and the only message you get is go read Dr. Bredesen's book, bring a list of blood tests to your doctor, go get the blood tests, read what you have to do and implement. these healthy lifestyle approaches, it's good for the brain, but it's good for the heart, and it's good for the arteries and the immune system. It's good for everything. So now I will share some details with you. All right, well, we all know the problem. I'm not going to dwell on it, but it is the 5th leading cause of death for women in the US, and in the UK, it's the #1 cause of death. Most patients are female, and the incidence increases sharply with age. After 85, 50% of people have dementia. Commonly understood to be currently no cure. There are drugs, Aricept, Axalon, for example, Namenda, which slows progression. All of these slow progression for maybe up to about 6 months. So if somebody's falling off a curve like this, maybe they flatten for 6 months and then they kind of restore their downward cycle. There is some evidence that some may do more harm than good in the long run. And of course, we've heard a lot in the press about the new monoclonal antibody drugs. They have been absolutely shown to reduce amyloid plaque, but not convincingly shown to be effective at improving cognition. There is one that has shown to be effective at more consistently and substantially slowing the progression, but they do have potentially serious side effects. And they're very expensive, and they're not covered by Medicare. So here's our beautiful brain cut kind of through the middle, and you're looking at, say, the right side from the middle, the inside of the brain out. This in the medial temporal lobe, this lower lobe here, is the hippocampus, which is a very important part of our short-term memory and learning, right next to the amygdala, which we're all familiar with from the fight or flight response. So here's a reasonably healthy brain, and with shrinkage, it looks like this, and a severely shrunk brain looks like that. This is what we want to avoid. So what causes Alzheimer's disease? It's commonly said, well, amyloid beta, which is a protein, seems to be produced in excess and clumping together, and then it builds up in between neurons and interferes with their communication, and tau tangles then start building up within the cells and disturbing the cellular function, and therefore over time we have a tremendous fallout of death of neurons and dysfunction with all the functions of our brain and thought processes. So here's a schematic of these green shrubs are the amyloid clumps that build up between the cells. This is a neuron. This is a cell. Inside, I don't know if you can see, but it's like little green threads, and they're tangled up, and that would be neurofibrillary tangles, the tau tangles, which also are second method by which these cells get damaged. Now, I pulled this from some headlines over the past years. Is Alzheimer's disease caused by an infection? Is it caused by, like, there's some evidence that Lyme has been found in the brains of some Alzheimer's patients, so various viral infections, Epstein-Barr, HSV. Is Alzheimer's diabetes of the brain? Diabetes type 3, it's been called. Diabetes, meaning that the brain itself usually runs on glucose, and when the brain gets deficient or is not sensitive to insulin anymore, then the insulin makes the glucose go into the cell. Then the cells start starving, not enough fuel, not enough metabolism, and they start to dampen down their metabolic rate, which is part of the picture and PET scan of what happens as the brain starts to be under distress and dysfunction. Air pollution, does that cause Alzheimer's? It's called inhalation Alzheimer's. It seems to be related. Is Alzheimer's caused by a virus? Is it caused by inflammation? So I already told you the story of how Dr. Bredesen at the Buck Institute of Aging had an epiphany when he put together all this research and said, okay, now we have to take a different tact. Here was his first paper published not quite 10 years ago. This was a case series of 10 patients. He presented this at my first training in 2018. I found it very impressive. Not only did he give story, but he gave data. This was one of the patients in that study who was an executive in a business. He used to be able to add long columns of numbers that have 2 digits in his head. And at the point he came to Dr. Bredesen, he was not able to remember his locker combination at the gym. 66-year-old ApoE43, we'll talk about what that is. In 2014 when he came, his fasting insulin was high, meaning that his body was insensitive. It was resistant to insulin, and I just told you that's very bad for the brain because it doesn't get energy. It also doesn't get a growth hormone because insulin is like a growth factor to brain cells. His inflammation was high, it was almost 10. The ideal is usually considered to be less than 2. Homocysteine, which is a byproduct of metabolism, builds up when we don't have enough B vitamins. It was 15, it should be at least less than 10. And vitamin D was low, it was under 30, which is considered the minimum. Symptoms, struggling. Now this is what really caught my attention. They did an MRI with software analysis called NeuroQuant, which is able to very accurately measure the volume of different parts of the brain, rather than just looking at the cross section saying, it looks like it shrank. The computer will look at it from all different directions and calculate what is the volume of that part of the brain. So at the hippocampus, we said, is that important part for short-term memory and learning? And his hippocampal volume was in the 17th percentile. That was 83% of people had a larger hippocampus than he did, as measured by everyone who'd come to have a NeuroQuant test. So he did Dr. Bredesen's program. He threw himself into it. He did it for less than 1 year, and he had dramatic turnaround in his metabolism. His fasting insulin was down to 8. Ideally, it'd be under 4, but look, he cut it by 75%. The CRP is almost to optimal, at less than 2. He's down to 3. Again, he cut that dramatically. Homocysteine almost to perfection. Vitamin D came up to an optimal level. He went back to working full time. Now, this is what the clincher was. This is what really sold me on this whole approach. His hippocampal volume in 10 months increased, and he was now in the 75th percentile. Only 25% of people had a larger hippocampus than him. His hippocampus grew back in less than 1 year. I was pretty astounded by that. So reversal of cognitive decline, Dr. Bredesen went on working with a number of other clinicians across the country to collect case histories of 100 patients. And he published that. Look, it is in a major journal, Journal of Alzheimer's Disease and Parkinsonism. Now, this is the first step towards actually doing a clinical trial. This is not a randomized trial. There is no control group other than the average documented decline of people with this level of cognitive impairment. But this is a pilot project. The results of this was positive enough that they are now planning a much larger trial that has 5 different sites across the entire country. So this started with 25 participants, MoCA 19 to 28. That may not mean much to most of you. That is a simple test, a memory assessment that a doctor or trained person can administer to a patient and come up with an objective level of, well, where are they in their cognitive functioning? It's not just memory, it's actually attention and visual spatial assessment, many different domains. And basically 30 is a score that's perfect, 28 is totally normal, 19 is just one above the Alzheimer's level. So if you're 18, you're getting into Alzheimer's territory. So this is just better than Alzheimer's, and all the way up to almost normal, but people that are saying, well, they had to at least have their partner say that they have at least 5 different areas out of 21 that were not as they used to be. They had declined. Oops, sorry. They did this Bredesen protocol, as Dr. Bredesen calls it. 84% of participants improved within 9 months. 12% did get worse, 4% had no change. So basically, this was a cognitive score. This was a CNS vital signs, an online assessment that can be done that's more comprehensive and global and higher resolution in assessing cognition. And at the start, here was the range. Oops, the average was around 37, 38 percentile for this group before they started to implement this program. Even at the 3-month marker, they were considerably better. Now they're already above average. And then they continued at 6 months, and then to 9 months, there was still an increment of improvement. Now we're back to the MoCA. Change in cognitive score. MoCA, remember, was 19 to 30 is either mild cognitive impairment to normal. And generally, over a year, with no treatment, people with these conditions will lose about 2% to 2.5%. They'll drop, they'll drop 3 points. I'm sorry. They'll drop 3 points on that scale. If they take one of these new monoclonal antibody tests, they will lose less, but they're still losing. And in this program, the average was a gain of over 3 points. This is just to emphasize how a $26,500 treatment a year, magic bullet, the best that modern medicine has to offer, it's not standing up to what this program did for these people. And the MRI scan, they had baseline and 9 months. Gray matter, which is our cells, our cell bodies, it would be expected to drop 2.2% per year if a person, a group of people with some degree of cognitive decline. These people actually had a slight increase in the thickness of their gray matter layer. The hippocampus, as we talked about, atrophy rates improved by 63% over a cognitive decline average, because usually they would decline 4% in a year, the hippocampus, in people who are on a path of cognitive decline. These people only lost at 1.29%. So what's going on? We know that amyloid, beta amyloid, is a protein. I showed you those pictures before, those little green bushes, clumps that are filling in the spaces between the neurons. So this is APP. APP is the precursor molecule. This is it right here. And interestingly, it is an important, see, this is a cell membrane of a neuron. It is an important membrane protein. It has a really important role in supporting neuronal function and repair if something goes wrong, and in general helping growth and supports the neurons. If it is broken into, here it's intact. If it is broken into two parts, just one splice, and this would be enzymatic activity that's governed by the genes. Genes govern this. They are epigenetically influenced. So if the epigenetics is saying to the gene, hey, it's a pretty good situation and this person is trying to learn something, let's go this direction and help them out. But if the epigenetics in the environment within the brain or what's coming at it and in the body is bad, is somehow it's challenged by an infection or by too much stress or by not enough sleep or by bad food, whatever it is, it will break into 4 pieces. I call that the quarreling quartet. 4 pieces. And that promotes amyloid deposition. Now, it's not just a punishment. There is actually research and basic science research that shows that amyloid can have a protective effect. It can actually protect neurons from the infectious agent if there's an infectious agent. And we could guess maybe if there are bad fats or too many free radicals or whatever it is that's coming at the brain, or certain chemicals, it may, or heavy metals, it may also sequester those. But the idea is that if you have an overload of negative impacts coming to the brain, you will have an excess of this response, which is actually trying to heal and protect the brain. But if it's too much, it'll become excess, and those will start to clump together, and we'll get this excess in amyloid that can damage the brain. So I come from a background in Ayurveda. It's a natural healing system from India. It's a sister science of yoga. And I'd say in all natural healing systems, there is this basic principle or a fundamental belief that the brain, or that the body is a healing system. It's trying to maintain balance. It's trying to stay healthy. It's trying to maintain itself. And I like the fact that we can look at this as, actually, this is like a barometer. If it's bad weather, this is going to happen. Bad is going to go to worse. If it's good weather, growth and support and enrichment of our brain is going to happen. So we know we have some control over our epigenetics. So here's a picture of it before it splits. Just a very important protein that sits in the neuronal cell membrane. So balance. So, okay, so this side, with all the French fries and trans fats and free radicals and excess maybe meat and hormones and chemicals and all of this, and sugar increasing, diabetes promoting sweet drinks, that's kind of a recipe for causing that APP, that amyloid precursor molecule, to go to the bad side. But if we load up the body with leafy greens and fresh fruits and berries and all sorts of healthy whole foods, we can tip the balance and help the brain see the environment as a very positive one for growth and development. So it's all about balance. Balance is the key to perfect health. This is an ancient Ayurvedic saying. So it seems like maybe we can just find one drug that will cause the APP to go to the good side and not become an amyloid excessive producer. Well, it's not that easy. And why? Because APP is influenced by at least 36 pathways. Health is complex. So is disease. And when we try to take a magic bullet, we may influence one thing. We usually throw something else out of balance. And we really rarely truly cure a disease. We really rarely restore health. We may slow a disease down, we may suppress it, all the autoimmune conditions, we have powerful immune suppressors, but they come at a cost. So here, we have so many factors. Dr. Bredesen likens it to a roof with 36 holes. We have probably 360 holes in this roof. The idea is, if you just address one of them, you've got 35 other ways in which that APP molecule can be triggered to go to the dark side. So we have to address absolutely as many as we can so that the roof doesn't leak. So, old system, new system. Old approach, amyloid is the cause, or we don't know the cause, and definitely there's no cure. Now, the principle is no one loses memory for no reason. There are over 36 contributors to cognitive decline. You fix enough of them and people get better. And I would say, as long as we catch it early enough, that not so much damage has been done. Just like any disease, it's harder to turn around cardiovascular disease once somebody's already had a heart attack and maybe a bunch of stents. You can change the lifestyle and prevent or slow down the progression for sure. But it's harder to just kind of make it go away. So this is a valuable conception of subtypes of dementia. I could also say this is like underlying drivers of the process of amyloid formation, what triggers it or what aggravates it. And this is Dr. Bredesen's contribution. He published this in one of his papers. He divided the causes or the subtypes. Their causes, they're also somewhat related clinical spectrums or clinical picture for each of these somewhat. Type 1, inflammation, which if you see the elevated CRP, C-reactive protein in the blood, that means the immune system's active, it's overactive, it's inflamed. Usually those people are a setup for a cardiovascular disease, and diet and stress usually are the things, mostly diet. Sugar, insulin resistance, atrophy, lack of hormones and nutrients to the point where the body is and the brain is shrinking, toxicity, mold exposure, infections, chemicals, then vascular dementia. This is another whole area. It's not Alzheimer's per se, but it can look a lot like it from lack of good blood flow to the brain, many strokes, silent strokes. Blood pressure in midlife has to be controlled to prevent this from becoming an issue later. And traumatic dementia, the football players, the soccer players who start getting dementia later in life.
Dr. Lonsdorf, it's Katira here. I hate to cut you off there, but we have some very eager audience members looking to learn a bit more about lifestyle tips. So I thought this might be a good opportunity to segue into our Q&A. So if you're ready, if you have anything to wrap up in the PowerPoint, feel free, but we are going to get ready to shift over to those questions.
I just want to say one thing for women, because this research actually by Lisa Mosconi, it was what triggered me to write a book for women called The Healthy Brain Solution for Women Over 40, 7 Keys to Staying Sharp on or Off Hormones. And she took cross-sections of women at different ages and of men in the premenopausal period in the earlier 40s. This is a very healthy brain. The red means that the nerves are very active, have great metabolism. In the perimenopause, as they started to go through irregular cycles and started this, you see there's a dramatic drop in the red here. Postmenopause, there's also some slight decrease over perimenopause, but this is a huge dramatic change. And this may be what we don't know, but it certainly is a factor for some women that puts them at higher risk for Alzheimer's later in life because they lost a lot of brain power or health or reserve during this time. And men don't. Men, here's the male baseline. Actually, the female had, at the same age, had more activity, healthier, but he loses very little over those 3 years of that age that women are going through perimenopause. She lost a lot. So I just want to say some of the newer research on hormones is that bioidentical hormones can be given safely to most women. They should be monitored. They should be given estrogen not by mouth. It should be only through the skin. So there are subtleties of that. I explain it in my book, and you can maybe find a doctor. Some of them are still caught 20 years ago thinking that it's never a good thing. But during that perimenopause, it very well may be protective of the brain and heart health later for a woman to actually take some balanced amount of hormone therapy at that time. So, all right, so I'm just going to say inflammation, heal your gut, avoid the sugar and the refined carbs. Make sure, get your nutrients tested, make sure you're getting enough hormone balance, make sure that's optimal. If you, they check for mold chemicals, they check for other kinds of chemicals. If you have toxicity in your body, remove it. There's many ways to do that. And
I had noticed a cognitive decline in the last
second. So she's going to say she had trouble transferring numbers from one place on the computer to another because she'd forget in the meantime. She was giving talks as a social worker she teaches, and she was having to call upon the audience to help her find words. She couldn't remember timelines, what had happened in the last few months, and her daughter found her reading a book and said, "Mom, why are you reading that book?" She said, "Oh, it's an interesting book." She said, "But Mom, we read it together 3 months ago," and she had no memory of that. So I'm going to skip over that part, and I'm going to skip to where she says what happened and what she did. I think she's smiling here. I think this is a good part.
And then right after that, we can jump into the Q&A.
What is that? Can you hear?
Oh, he said right after that, we'll jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, and can you hear the video? Because I'm not sure I pressed optimize for video. You can hear it okay?
Yes.
To this, because I do not want to go down that road that my mother had. And so when I came back, I made those changes. I began to follow the diet very closely. Ate a lot of vegetables and grains, and also the lentils and things like that, and also structured my bedtime, which was something that was suggested, and took the herbal supplements just as they were suggested. And within 2 weeks' time, I could see a huge difference. I recognized that as I was trying to transpose those numbers in the computer from one place to another, I was remembering them rather than having to write them down. It wasn't difficult to remember words anymore. When I was in conversation with family or friends, or even in the trainings, and I would just begin to recognize and see that, and I was going, "This is incredible. This is absolutely incredible."
All right, so I will stop sharing there, and we can go to questions.
All right. Happy to join you here. Okay, so I hope you can hear me okay. So I think what I'd like to segue immediately into is we definitely have people in the audience that are looking for the practical tips, that what are the biggest lifestyle changes that you recommend through your experience and through everything you've seen with this protocol with Dr. Bredesen?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person. This particular lady had elevated inflammatory markers, and she shared with me that she had been eating poorly because she moved in with her son and daughter-in-law and was eating the kind of junk they were eating, and she had noticed this decline at that time. So I actually just gave her, first of all, I said, well, you have to go do all these blood tests and we'll see what else we need to do, but meanwhile, you need to clean up your system. So I gave her Ayurvedic things and diet and the herbs and a routine. And that was enough for her to have this dramatic change. It's like her body went back to balance. She cleared out a lot of the impurities, and she created a anti-inflammatory diet for herself and got more sleep, etc. So that is one thing. It depends. I think it's hard to say exactly what, because what we do is we throw the kitchen sink at everybody. We do all these tests, we see what people need. If their hormones are very low, they may be a candidate to have some hormone therapy as part of it. But what can they do themselves that doesn't require a doctor? I would say that, you know, if you're eating sugar and white flour and sweets, and then you got to get away from that. You have to change your diet. You have to get, especially if your insulin or your blood sugar isn't great. Diabetes is a huge risk factor for dementia, just as it is for heart disease. So that's basic. If you're drinking a lot, I know if at 14 drinks a week, that's more than 2 a day, there's a definite increase in dementia. But Dr. Bredesen feels that because alcohol is neurotoxic, it is antithetical to a healthy brain program. So to minimize alcohol and to make sure that you drink other things, lots of water, for example, to help your body purify. So another thing is actually exercise is probably the most proven, you know, evidence-based recommendation we could give. So regular exercise, even just 10,000 steps of walking, which we're all being encouraged to do, it reduces the risk of Alzheimer's by about 50%. Like, that's huge. If you walk only 6,000 steps, if you do it with purpose, with intention, and briskly, like most of you, if you live in New York, most everybody's kind of in a hurry. So 6,000 steps can actually be enough, and that can lower the risk by 57%. And those of you who are a little more couch potatoes and can only manage 3,800 steps a day, you still can reduce your Alzheimer's risk by over 25%, just because you're doing that much. So it's not all or nothing, it's incremental. So the more you do, the better it is.
Fantastic. Thank you. And we did have some questions on exercise as well. And I'm not sure if you've seen any studies on this, but something we've heard here at Spark Your Health is that for cognitive health, you actually don't need to necessarily be doing the high intensity work. It's actually, what we've heard is that it's actually better for your brain, as you're saying, to go out for a brisk walk. Have you heard anything on that in research world?
Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the chats. So the brisk walk, actually, one study looked at all types of exercise, all routines, all schedules of exercise. And the only thing they could find that was common to all of them that was associated with reduced risk was at least 2 hours a week of moderate exercise. So I guess you would say at least 30 minutes a day, 4 days a week.
Okay, thank you for that. And I know you mentioned a bit about food and staying away from things like sugar and flour. Do you have any other tips that you've seen, through your experience, any really great brain health foods that we should all walk away from tonight going to pick up at the grocery store?
I think we should get away from the idea that there's a magic bullet. We all know that nuts and seeds are good, and walnuts and omega-3s. Omega-3s, by the way, intake of substantial omega-3s, perhaps through like wild-caught salmon and adequate amounts, or perhaps fish oil supplements, can actually mitigate the 40% increase of dementia that comes in lonely people. Loneliness and social isolation is a big risk factor. So I would say stay socially active. There's research that shows that when people do experience loneliness or social isolation, there are changes actually in the brain and shrinkage of the prefrontal cortex that is associated with people having less trust in other people and tending to isolate more. So it can be a vicious cycle. So if you are in a situation where you've been kind of lonely or by yourself and you're maybe justifying it that it's not worth making these connections, it really is. And just know that your brain may be tricking you in a way, that you've been alone too long. So you need to reach out and establish those warm and friendly connections again. And that's very protective.
So just to shift gears a little bit, we have had quite a few questions coming in about blood tests. I know that different blood tests might vary depending on the individual, but if you do have a list of blood tests that you recommend, that may be helpful so people know what to ask their doctors for.
Sure. What I did was I can't say them all now because it's like 40 different things, but I did put a complimentary copy of the form that I use for my patients that lists all these blood tests. You can download that at healthybrainsolution.com if you like. And Dr. Bredeson's book gives a sample of those as well. And be open to the fact that your doctor may or may not feel that some of those are really needed. But if you want to do more extensive screening, then your doctor might be willing to write you. You could go to lifeextension.com, for example, and you can order a lot of those things yourself.
And we'll be sure that that's in the follow-up email as well. So that should help. We're getting some questions about the Ayurvedic protocol, and if you can explain that a little bit further.
Sure. Ayurveda is, as most of you know, a 5,000-year-old system of health, and it addresses the entire system. It understands particularly the powerful role that digestion and gut health plays in our whole body health. And I would say that we focus a lot, and Ayurveda gives me tools to address certain digestive problems that patients coming to me have that are a lot more complicated to address through all sorts of functional supplements, that we can make a shift in diet for that person that's oriented towards what we say is their body type by taking their pulse and examining them and understanding their nature, which is an Ayurvedic concept, and gearing the diet. Not just everybody has to do keto or everyone does this or everyone eats that, but gearing the diet to their needs as an individual understood Ayurvedically, and some perhaps herbs, spices, habits of eating and times of eating and what time of day they should eat their main meal, which is always lunchtime, and eating less at night. All these things can help to restore good gut function without taking a lot of supplements. So it's individualized. Actually, I think you're going to put it in the follow-up that there are quizzes on my website where you can take and find out your gut type or your stress type, and then specific recommendations Ayurveda will give you to balance out that tendency that you have. So they're personalized, and they just don't fall into any other categories of functional medicine or integrative or Western concepts. They're a whole nother dimension that very powerful and simple, and that's my go-to first, and it will take care of 75% of the digestive problems.
Perfect. And that seems to be one of the keys, is personalizing the approach. We did have a question about if you could go into the spring detox or detoxing in general to support cognitive decline.
Yes, detox is in order if we find some evidence of certain types of inflammatory markers being elevated. They often are elevated due to some hidden infection or exposure to mold and the kinds of chemicals that mold puts into the air. We can test that through the urine, because people breathe it in, it goes out through the kidneys. So if in those cases, or somebody has heavy metals, there are a number of supplements and that will help to bind those toxins within the body and eliminate them through the kidneys or the liver. And there's certain binders, there's a set of program that we do with those supplements.
Got it. All right, I think we have time for one last question. Can the reversal of decline be the same for different types of dementia, or are there specific protocols in place for different pathologies?
There are somewhat different, but really it's the personalization that's the most. But if somebody has, say we call them type 1 inflammation, then as I said before, there will be, you're asking if there's certain treatments or certain clinical presentations?
Certain treatments, like do the treatments need to vary depending on how the individual is presenting and which pathology they have?
Not every person will need to take anti-inflammatory supplements. I mean, omega-3s, yes, to get to an optimal percentage of omega-3s in the blood, but not extra strong ones. Those would be for people who have persistent inflammation, even though they change their diet and their lifestyle. There's also, if they have toxicity, they'll do a detox program that somebody else, some people don't have any evidence of toxicity, so we don't have to do that. Some people are fine with their hormones and their nutrients are all on just fine. They don't have to take supplements for that. So it's individual, but most people end up taking quite a few supplements.
Well, I know you mentioned something about this at the beginning, but please let us know if there's anything you'd like the audience to walk away with. Please let us know if there's like a top tip you'd like them to walk away with this evening.
Yes, I think the top tip is to get enough sleep, eat good food, exercise. I'd say that exercise is the hardest thing for many, many people to fit in. And if it's the only additional thing that you commit to do for your brain, that's what you should do, is to increase your exercise, because exercise helps detox. It increases blood flow, it increases the kidney function, it increases the elimination of impurities that may be stuck in the tissues through that increased circulation and the dilation of blood vessels and the heat and the sweating. Sweating is a great way to detoxify the body. It also increases digestive power, so what you eat will be digested better. Weight training component of exercise increases your lean body mass, and it helps to optimize blood sugar and to help prevent prediabetes and diabetes. Weight training also supports or stimulates BDNF, the brain neurotrophic hormone, which supports the development of new brain cells. So I'd say that exercise is, we have a love-hate relationship with exercise, but there's all the more reason, because it's been found to be so powerful at preventing Alzheimer's, to exercise and stay moving.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're all going to walk away from this wanting to get outside tonight or tomorrow for a nice walk, or any other type of exercise that everyone here chooses. But Dr. Lonsdorf, this was so informative. I really appreciate, we all appreciate you taking the time this evening to share your wisdom with us. And again, everyone, I will be sending out a follow-up email. So all of the website links that I was sending and anything referenced, like the blood tests, we will be able to send all of that in that follow-up email. So I thank Dr. Lonsdorf, and I thank everyone for being with us this evening, and stay well. We'll see you for a future Spark Your Health talk in the near future. Good night, everyone.